You know, a huge shakeup could be on the horizon at the world's most powerful financial institution. A new name has been floated to lead the Federal Reserve, and believe me, it's a move that could have a direct impact on your savings, your loans, pretty much the entire economy.
So why is this one nomination making investors so jumpy? What is it about this particular person that has Wall Street buzzing? Well, that's the big question we're going to unpack right now.
Here's how we'll break it down. We'll start with the nomination itself. Then we'll get into his really unique and, frankly, kind of contradictory policy ideas. We'll see why markets are paying such close attention, and then we'll look at the whole economic picture he'd be walking into.
Okay, so let's get right to the headline that's driving this entire conversation. The news is straightforward. President Donald Trump has nominated Kevin Warsh to take the helm from the current chair, Jerome Powell. Now, Warsh isn't new to this world. He was a Fed governor during the 2008 financial crisis. But his return could set the stage for a really significant shift in how the Fed does things.
But here's the thing. To really understand the market's reaction, you have to understand the man. And Kevin Warsh, well, he's a fascinating puzzle. He's a policymaker who seems to have completely changed his tune over the years.
Back during his first go-around at the Fed, Warsh was known as an inflation hawk. That means he was really worried about prices getting out of control. He was deeply skeptical of the Fed's huge bond-buying programs, what everyone calls quantitative easing, or QE. Back in 2010, he warned that the risks of flooding the economy with all this money were, in his exact words, unknown, uncertain, and potentially large.
And this is where that contradiction really snaps into focus. The Warsh of the past, he was worried about inflation, wanted to pull back support quickly. But the Warsh of today? Totally different story. He talks about cool new technologies like AI keeping inflation down, and now he says the Fed can cut interest rates a lot. A view that, it's worth noting, lines up perfectly with President Trump.
So what gives? Why the complete 180? Well, his thinking now is that AI and other tech are going to create this massive productivity boom. And in his view, that's a powerful disinflationary force. In plain English, it'll naturally keep prices from rising too fast, which gives the Fed a lot more breathing room to cut rates.
So this all leads us to his core policy proposal, what some people are calling the Warsh Doctrine. And honestly, at first glance, its two main pillars look like they're completely working against each other. Here it is in a nutshell. On one hand, he wants to cut short-term interest rates. That's a classic move to hit the gas on the economy. But on the other hand, he wants to shrink the Fed's gigantic portfolio of bonds, which is like tapping the brakes. So what's the deal? How do these two opposite moves fit together?
Okay, quick detour. When we talk about the Fed's balance sheet, just think of it as the Fed's own massive investment portfolio. When it buys bonds, it's pumping money into the system. When it sells them, or just lets them expire, it's pulling that money back out. Simple as that.
And I mean, just look at the sheer scale of this thing. After years of fighting one crisis after another, the Fed's balance sheet just exploded to over $6 trillion. Warsh himself calls it bloated, and he wants to bring it way, way down.
So this is the key puzzle, right? He's proposing hitting the accelerator with rate cuts while simultaneously hitting the brakes by shrinking the balance sheet. And this very strange, very unique combination is exactly why the markets are watching every single move.
So how does this all tie together? Well, it all points toward one specific outcome, that is investors everywhere talking, a steeper yield curve.
Now, the yield curve sounds super complicated, but it's really just a chart. It shows you the interest rates you'd get on bonds with different deadlines. It's one of the most powerful tea leaves we have for reading the economy's future.
Normally, this curve slopes up. You get paid more interest for locking up your money for a longer time. That makes sense, right? That's a normal steep curve. But sometimes it flattens out or even flips upside down. That's an inverted curve. And historically, an inverted curve has been an incredibly reliable warning sign of a recession.
So here's exactly how the Warsh Doctrine would basically force the curve to get steeper. Step 1. You cut the Fed's main interest rate. That shoves the short-term rates, the front end of the curve, down. Step 2. You shrink the balance sheet. That means the Fed isn't buying tons of long-term bonds anymore. Less demand means their prices fall and their interest rates, or yields, go up. That pushes the back end of the curve up. What do you get? A much wider gap, a steeper curve.
And look, this isn't just some abstract Wall Street concept. This is the part that hits your wallet directly. Those long-term interest rates, they basically set the price for almost every major loan you can think of. So a steeper curve means higher costs for 30-year mortgages, for car loans, for the loans businesses use to expand. It's a straight line from Fed policy to your bank account.
Now let's zoom out for a minute. Because to really understand why he's proposing a plan like this, you have to look at the economic world he'd be stepping into around 2026.
Well, according to a long-term forecast from Voya Investment Management, the next decade looks like it's going to be one of pretty modest returns. They're projecting the S&P 500 will return about 4.5% a year. That's way below the historical average. It suggests an environment where growth is just going to be a lot harder to find.
And that outlook is pretty much mirrored in what they see for the economy as a whole. Voya's base case has U.S. GDP just chugging along at a steady but not spectacular 2% a year for the next decade. So, not a boom, but not a bust either. Just a slow growth world.
So the next Fed chair, whoever it is, will be navigating a really complex world. On the one hand, you have the promise of AI-driven productivity that Warsh is banking on. But on the other, you have this sticky inflation that just won't seem to go back down to that 2% target. Plus, all the uncertainty around government spending and global trade. That's the tightrope they'll have to walk. And this might be the single most important point of all. The Fed chair is incredibly powerful, no doubt, but they are not a dictator. To make any changes, especially radical ones like these, Kevin Warsh would have to convince a majority of the 12 voting members of the Federal Open Market Committee. Building that consensus is a political skill that's going to be every bit as important as his economic ideas.
So, at the end of the day, we're left with this: a bold, totally unconventional plan to remake American monetary policy, proposed by a nominee who's gone from a hawk to a dove. It's a fascinating idea for sure, but it raises the ultimate question. In an institution as powerful and slow-moving as the Federal Reserve, can one person really change its course?